Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today I'm going to be giving you my early predictions for the 2024 Jacksonville Jaguars. So we're going to be taking a look at the schedule. This was released just a couple days ago now. Finally got time to record, so we're able to take a look at this. I've checked it out beforehand, gave my thoughts, or at least put them down on paper on what I think is going to happen each week, what the difficult games are going to be, and then also as well, what I think might happen for the rest of the teams in the NFL. And of course, it's a lot of games to predict. There's going to be so many things that go differently than what I think will happen. And you also got the injury question, right? Because one quarterback goes down, everything goes haywire, right? And you could talk about our positions too. The point is, like, it's very hard to predict this stuff. It's more so an exercise that will give you guys an idea of just how good I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are. And so, going into this season, you compare it to last year's schedule, it is a second place schedule now because Houston won the division last year. They will take on the harder teams. They're going to have to go on the road into Arrowhead, for example, and play some of those harder games, and their strength of schedule at the end of the year will probably be ranked higher than what Jacksonville has. But regardless, Jacksonville still plays quite a few good teams, and a lot of this has to do with the division getting better. Because as these teams have all kind of figured out what they're doing, and of course there's some questions, right, with the Colts and with the Titans coming in this year, everyone generally has a lot of confidence, right? I mean, you could probably make an argument for any team in this division in the perfect scenario or even just a good scenario to come out on top. It's completely possible. Maybe the Titans would be a more difficult argument than the other three, but you could still imagine where things could fall their way. I don't think that'll happen, right? But point is, it's a very competitive division. There's a lot of different ways they can go down. And so that's going to make these games very difficult. It's going to make the schedule much more difficult for all the teams in the division because you got 6 matches that you just don't know who's going to win. So with that said, we're going to go ahead. We're going to kind of preview the games here, and then we'll jump into it. So one of the first things that stood out to me, you look at the early part of the schedule for Jacksonville, you go on the road in Miami. I don't think that's a super hard game. I think that it's a good team they're playing, but it's also a team that bled a lot of pieces this offseason, and I'm not sure how they're going to perform early in the year. That could be a game Jacksonville really wins or loses. But you look at the games after. You play against Cleveland. You host them, thankfully, which helps quite a bit. But Cleveland played really dominantly, I felt like, last year against Jacksonville, and they did that with a backup quarterback. Now, given the backup might be better than the actual quarterback, who knows what happens, right? If Deshaun Watson is starting, I don't think he's going to be that good. And so there's a chance that Jacksonville could pull out that game, but you've got another difficult game. You go into week 3. You're on the road going into Buffalo, I believe on Monday Night Football as well. So that's going to be a big one. Jacksonville's had their number, but it's a hard game again. And then week 4, you're heading into Houston. So the start of the schedule is pretty tough. And then from that point on, you get Indianapolis week 5. You go into London for week 6, week 7. Things start to kind of lighten up for a while until in the mid periods, start to play some harder teams again, and it just kind of evens out. So the start is really where I think we're going to learn a lot about this team, because I could see them coming in and having a really bad start to the year. I could see things falling apart very fast. I could also see them coming out 3-1 or even 4-0 in the best case scenario. I doubt they go undefeated during that period, but it is possible. You can argue that for every single one of those games, that Jacksonville could win every single one. But I think for this team, whether or not they come out with a winning record or 500 or whatever it is, they're going to have to keep their composure through the start of the year, because the way the schedule's set up, if they crumble like they did last year, and to be fair, last year, early in the year, they were able to recover. But just talking about how they finished out, the team that they were the last time they were playing regular season football, if they act like that team, they could get off to a really bad start and things could spiral out of control pretty dang quick. I don't think that'll happen, but that's a possibility. So let's go ahead. Let's jump into this. We'll go week by week. I'll give you my thoughts on what I think will happen. So the game against Miami is kind of goes the same as the game against Cleveland as well. I think it's pretty 50-50. I could see it going either way. I think the teams are very closely matched. I think Miami gets, the home field advantage, of course, in this game, which helps out a little bit. It's hot as well in Miami, but it's hot in Jacksonville too. So I don't think that's as much of an advantage as it is against, maybe the Minnesota Vikings, as we saw a couple of years ago. But I think Miami can make up maybe for having a little bit worse of a roster at this point with the home field advantage, whereas Cleveland, I think they're a little bit better of a team overall when you're not looking at quarterback, but they're also going on the road. You got the questions about Deshaun Watson. So I think Jacksonville's going to come out 1-1. For the sake of this scenario, we're going to give them the win against the Miami Dolphins in week 1, and we're going to have them fall in week 2 to the Cleveland Browns, who I think, looking at the defensive line, looking at how good they are just on that side of the ball, I could see them really giving Jacksonville's offensive line a handful, especially if there's any injuries early in the year. It could be hell for Jacksonville. I think they've done things to improve the offensive line depth, but I'm not at the point where I really trust them going up against the Browns. We saw last year where we had injuries at tackle, and there were quite a few, right? It wasn't like just one player went down, but they had to trot out Blake Hance on the field. He scored a 0 on PFF going up against Myles Garrett. Like, if we have problems on the offensive line, if this unit is not performing really well, this could be a very bad game for Jacksonville. So I'm going to have them go 1-1. You can flip those games if you want, but I think that's probably how they start out. Now, week 3 against Buffalo. Jacksonville's had their number recently. They quite frankly dominated them in London, and the score was, I would say, closer than what the actual game was, because Buffalo scored late, was trying to make it close, and they came up short. But this year around, even with Buffalo having some issues over the offseason with cap space, losing players, I do think that Buffalo did pretty decent in the draft. I think they did well, actually, with their first pick with Keon Coleman. I think that's going to be a phenomenal pairing for them, and I could see Keon Coleman being really good from the start in that situation. That was one of my favorite teams for him to go to. I don't think that Buffalo has an incredible team. I think they're a broken team, in fact, but that's more so playoff talk. They're a very strong team early in the year. This is week 3. This is going to be a home game for them. And I think there was a massive difference for Jacksonville last year, being able to not have to travel up to Buffalo Stadium and instead go to London. That was a big difference in that game, and I would go as far to say that difference might have been the little bit on the edge that tipped the scales towards Jacksonville's favor. Now, Jacksonville, like I said, they dominated them, right? But I think a lot of that does have to play into the fact they were there for a week. Buffalo was traveling. I do think that was a part of it. Now, if you're Buffalo, you got to win the game, right? You can't make excuses. But I can at least say for Jacksonville, things were on their side in that scenario. And this one, I think things are on Buffalo's side. Hosting that game up in Buffalo, that time of year, it's probably not snowing yet, but I think the home field advantage is real. I think they're going to be prepared for this game. I also think Jacksonville is going to have some players who, want to get revenge on their old team, right? Not everything has to be a revenge game, but you got Gabe Davis, you got Mitch Morse, who got cut by the team this offseason. I think it could be a really close one, but I am going to give this to Buffalo because Jacksonville will be in their early season form. They will have a new defensive coordinator they're working out with. I think things will work out really well with Ryan Nielsen, but I could see him coming up short on prime time where they've also struggled over the last year. So not a great start so far. And you get into a really rough game in week 4 against the Houston Texans. And, you could flip these games, right? Because I think at the end of the day, Jacksonville's probably going to split the series with Houston. And if they don't, it's probably 2 losses to Houston. The reason why I say that is because, they haven't swept the Houston Texans and ever. As a fan, I'd say that because I have never seen that in my life at this point. They've done pretty poorly against them since I started watching football. but that doesn't have to be the case now necessarily. I just think that these teams are both very good. I think they're probably going to split the series. Jacksonville has struggled quite a bit on their home turf, but in this situation, I think I'm going to have Houston pull out the early game. Jacksonville's going to be struggling early on. They're going to have to travel. Houston's going to be prepared for this game, and I think they pull out the first one, and things might flip the other way in the second matchup. So flip them if you want, but I think they're going 1-1, and I'm going to have the loss be here in week 4. Now, Jacksonville is obviously starting the season 1-3 here, and that's scary. But here's the good thing. You get out of the first 4 weeks, if you have one win in those games, it's a pretty good chance you're coming out of this with a winning record by the end of week 7. Because you've got some very easy games coming up. Now, I don't want to call Indianapolis necessarily an easy team to beat, right? But they have struggled for a long time in Jacksonville. And at this point, I can't have them win in Jacksonville. I just cannot see it. Anthony Richardson's going to be, in his 5th game of this year, realistically, unless he has to sit out the start because of his injury. I don't think that's the case. But I don't think he comes into Jacksonville and puts up a fight that's good enough to win that game. The Jaguars are going to be more desperate than Indianapolis at that point. They have the history of winning in Jacksonville against them. They're going to get back to 2-3 here. Going into week 6, they're going to be traveling on the road into London, a place where rookie quarterbacks have done very poorly, except, well, funny enough, Trevor Lawrence, who ended up getting his first win in his career in London against the Dolphins. In this game, as much as I think you can look at Chicago's roster and say they have a lot of really good players, they have a loaded offense, and there's a lot of reason to think that they could actually be a really good playoff team this year. I think going on the road like that with a lot of young players in a situation they're not super familiar with, Jacksonville also having a losing record, needing to get back into competition in the division, especially with the loss to Houston hurting them as far as tiebreakers, I think they're going to win this game. I think they're more prepared for it. I think they're still, at this point, a better team. And they're going to get back to 500 in week 6. Going into week 7, I think it's a very easy matchup for Jacksonville. You never know, of course, right? Things can always go very unexpected. We've seen that as Jaguars fans. We're very familiar with that. But you got Drake May heading into London for the first time, another rookie quarterback. You've been there an extra week. It's the New England Patriots. Their team is not as strong as it was 5 years ago. This is a completely different franchise right now. And they're rebuilding. They're doing well with their rebuild, I would say. They are still in the middle of that. And so I don't think they're going to win on the road in London with a rookie quarterback, no matter how much I like Drake May. So Jacksonville is going to get on a little bit of a win streak here, I think. After week 7, they're going to get up to 4-3. And they're heading into week 8 with a tough game against the Green Bay Packers. Now, I think this one's pretty evenly matched because while I'd give Green Bay probably a little bit of an advantage roster-wise, Jacksonville has home field advantage in this game against a team up north that's going to be playing in some really tough weather. So I think that's going to help Jacksonville, but I also don't think they're going to win every single game that's close. And so with a little bit of a win streak coming in, I think that the Jaguars probably fall in this one, end up going down to 4-4 before week 9, where they have a very big game. Sunday Night Football, I believe, against the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a rematch between Doug Peterson and his former team. First one, it just did not end as you expected, right? They went up, I think, 21-0 almost, fumbled the ball. Trevor Lawrence could not hold on to it. I don't remember if he threw a pick in that, but he turned it over quite a bit. A lot of rainy condition, really struggled. Jacksonville fell 29-21. And this time, I obviously mentioned from last year that they were not good in primetime, that they really struggled in those situations. I think that Jacksonville pulls out this game. I think being at 4-4, having a really tough division that you're going up against, I think they're going to pull back in. I think they're going to get back to a winning record, and they're going to win against a team that also ended this season very similar to how Jacksonville did in the Philadelphia Eagles. Only difference was that the Eagles had 2 more wins heading into the final 6 weeks. That's why the Eagles still made the playoffs, and they still went home the first round, which, I'll be honest, if Jacksonville somehow won that last week or had made the playoffs, they still probably would have been knocked out immediately in the first round, given how poorly the team was playing at the time. So these are 2 teams in very similar situations, and I think Jacksonville ends up pulling it out this time, not making the same mistakes they did before. I think a lot's going to be on the line, whereas Philadelphia, even with how the season ended, I still think they're in a pretty comfortable situation. Now, getting into week 10 here. We go down, we play the Minnesota Vikings. Now, there are some easy games on this schedule. I think this is one of the top ones. Well, I like what the Vikings did in the draft, even considering how much they gave up in the future, which quite frankly does not impact them for this game. It only helps them. I like the J.J. McCarthy pick. I like the Dallas Turner pick, but I don't know if McCarthy's starting at this point. I think he's a player they need to sit for his rookie year. So this could be Sam Darnold leading the Vikings into Jacksonville. And whether or not it is, I think Jacksonville's going to be ready for that game. I think they're going to be the better team, and I think they're going to win. I think they're going to get up to 6-4, and they're going to head into week 11 with a respectable record that's competing for the top of their division. Because you look at the Texans, they've got a hard schedule still. The Colts very much still got a rookie-ish quarterback in Anthony Richardson, who didn't get to play a ton in his first year. So Jacksonville's very much in it at this point. And then you got a really tough game here. Going on the road into Detroit. And while Jacksonville probably showed a little bit with their joint practices last year that maybe they weren't so bad that they're going to get blown out every time they play Detroit like they did in 2022, I don't think Jacksonville's as good of a team. I think both teams were in very similar situations. I think the main difference was that while they both had these miraculous runs, Detroit's was, for one, much deeper. It was much better. And Detroit, as well, has built their roster much better than Jacksonville has. Their investments have generally been much more worth it. Their draft picks have been better. That is a better, more talented team hosting you in their stadium. They got you pretty bad the last time. I think Detroit wins this game. And I think Jacksonville ends up falling down to 6-5 at this point, heading into their bye week in week 12. So you got 6 games remaining. You're 6-5. You're probably second or third place at this point. And this is where the schedule starts to get very much involves division teams at this point. You got 4 of your last 6 matchups against division opponents. 1 against Houston, 1 against Indianapolis, 2 against Tennessee. And then you got some other AFC matchups. So every game from this point on is within the conference. Now, week 13, Jacksonville is hosting Houston. Well, I talked about the Jaguars struggling in their own stadium against Houston. I think given that they lost the first game in this scenario, given that the Jaguars had the bye advantage, which this is a big deal for them, they're going to have 2 weeks to prepare for this game, whereas the Houston Texans bye week is in week 14. So they will be coming off of, let's see who they play. They'll be playing Tennessee the week before, which is always a good game between those 2 teams. But Jacksonville's going to have the bye advantage. They're going to be at home. Fans are going to be there. And if they lost that first game, I think this is a must-win situation for them to try to get back into the division. If they lose this, I think they're out. And we saw how they played last year in that situation. Well, it was not followed up very well. Jacksonville played a good game. And if it wasn't for a really bad call, as far as an interception that should have had a flag on it, Houston would have probably got blown out in that game too. So I think Jacksonville exercises their demons in week 13. They play the Texans at home. I think they finally beat the Texans at home. I think this is for the first time that I've ever been able to see them do this as a fan. So hopefully that happens, right? But I think they pull it off. Now you're heading into week 14. You play the Tennessee Titans for the first time. And it's a different coach, right? It's not Mike Vrabel anymore. You can make a pretty strong argument saying that Jacksonville might just sweep him because of that. But the Jaguars very much do have issues with the Titans. And the Titans are a very improved team from last year. Made a lot of big additions. I don't really love their draft picks, I will say. I think they might have actually picked busts for both of their guys. We'll see in a couple years, of course. But if there were high bust potential players, I think there were J.C. Latham and Tavondre Sweat, to be fair. Now, they had some good picks later, right? But those don't really tilt the odds too much for me. So I think at this point, even with them having a bad draft, in my opinion, and we'll, of course, see as these rookies develop and they play out their careers, I think Tennessee did a lot during the offseason to improve. I think they have a very good receiving core at this point. They have a good, they have a good running back, I would say. They have a good backup as well in Tyjae Spears. And we'll see what Will Levis is. If Will Levis sucks, well, this might be a sweep by Jacksonville. But I think Tennessee is going to put up a fight, and I think they're going to win one of these games. I think it's going to be the one where they're at home. So Jacksonville is very much kind of hanging around this 500 mark, just over it, not really able to get a ton of momentum going. You got all these hard division games. You got a difficult middle of the schedule. The start of it set you behind. But then you come into week 15. You play against the New York Jets. And this could be a really good game. It really depends on how New York's doing at that point. Is Aaron Rodgers healthy? I think they did enough to keep him upright. I think they made a phenomenal move in the draft, picking up Olu Fashanu, who is one of my favorite prospects from this class. I think they're going to be able to protect him. I think they're going to be heading into that game as a very good team that's firing on all cylinders. But Jacksonville's hosting here, and they're going to need a win because they've been bouncing around this 500 mark. They're trying to separate in a difficult division, and I'm going to have them win at home against the Jets. I don't think the Jets are going to be a perfect team. I don't think they're going to be unbeatable. I think this is one of those games that Jacksonville wins. I think they've had their number a little bit recently too. And so I think they pull it out in week 15. In week 16, you're on the road against the Raiders. Now, could this be a sneaky game? It could. That's possible. And Jacksonville could lose this. But I do think that they're a much better team. I think they have a better quarterback situation. They're going to be playing against Gardner Minshew again as well. Minshew struggled the last time he played Jacksonville. He's done it both times he's played Jacksonville because he included his plays from week 1 of last year as well if you want. I think Jacksonville is the better team, and I think they're able to win that game. I think things are firing on all cylinders at this point. You have Ryan Nielsen probably having this defense humming as he wants at this point of the year. And I think they're going to start separating. I think they get up to 9-6. They start looking good. They're in playoff position at this point. They really need to just try to win out. Then week 17, you got a hard game against Tennessee. Now, given that Tennessee won the first one, and this is in Jacksonville, Jacksonville's going to be in the fight for the lead in the division, whereas Tennessee, I don't think, will be a part of it at this point. I think they'll play better than what maybe people think. I just don't think it's going to be this 10-7, 11-6 mark. I think at this point, Jacksonville's the better team, and they get the best of them, and they win in week 17. You're up to 10-6. I think this is where they're going to be entering this final week. And this is where things get crazy. Because you look at the AFC. You've got a lot of teams that I think could end up around 10 wins or 11 wins. You look at other divisions. I think the Jets and the Bills are very much candidates for that. I mean, Miami could even throw themselves into the mix. I don't think they will. But I think you probably got two teams from the East. You look at the North, you got the Ravens and the Bengals. If the Bengals are able to protect their quarterback, I think they're going to be able to make the playoffs, and I think they're going to be a very good playoff team. I think they're going to have a very good record heading in. Even as much as they struggle early in the season, I think the Bengals will have the same record Jacksonville does. I think the Ravens will definitely do it as well. Then you got teams like the Houston Texans and the Indianapolis Colts. The Texans finished 10-7. They have a more difficult schedule this next year. but I still think that they're going to have a good year, even if they struggle. And the Colts, strength of schedule, I think it might be one of the easiest in the NFL. And we'll take a look at that here in a second when we look at the final results of this. But the Colts don't even have to be the best team in the division, I think, to win the division, because they have easier games. They're just going to be set up in a better situation. And then, of course, out west, you got the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't think anyone else is reaching 10 wins this year. I don't know if anyone else has a winning record. I think the Raiders might sneak in at 9-8. That's probably it. So this last game between the Colts and the Jaguars could very much be for a playoff spot. Even with both teams being somewhere around this record, I think that whoever loses might not make it in. And for Jacksonville, and while I think this is a 50-50 game, you're on the road in Indianapolis. You're playing a team that I think at this point is a little underrated. I think the Colts are a very good team. I think Anthony Richardson in his games last year showed that he's a good quarterback, or he can be at least. He didn't really turn over the ball a whole ton. The problem with him is how much he rushes it and how he hurts himself doing that. I think he learns his lesson this year, and I think he stays healthy. If he doesn't, this whole argument goes out the window, and I don't think the Colts are making it into the playoffs unless Joe Flacco, who I think they signed, has like a second incredible year. And I doubt that's the case. So you're playing against a team that has a young quarterback who showed a ton of talent his first year, who I think is going to improve. And keep in mind, almost beat Jacksonville last year in week 1 in Indianapolis. A very close game that came down to the wire. I think Indianapolis puts up a big fight here. They got really nice additions in Leatu Latu, and then A.D. Mitchell. I think they've got a very good team overall, with maybe some questions at cornerback. But this game to me is a toss-up. And for the sake of home field advantage, for the sake that the Jaguars have usually split this series with the Indianapolis Colts, and that they won the first game, I'm going to say that Indianapolis ends up winning the final matchup. And like I said, this could be 50-50. Could go either way. I could see the Jaguars pulling it out, but I think they have to prove something before I say they're going to go sweep the Colts again. Because the Colts lost their quarterback. It's kind of a different story, I feel like. But where does this land Jacksonville? You think at 10-7, they're probably making the playoffs, right? It's a good record. Not many teams miss there. Given what I was saying earlier with how these teams can finish and how a lot of teams could have that many wins, I have Jacksonville just missing. And maybe the tiebreaker ends up differently. Maybe they make it in over these teams, but they end up being the 8th seed in this scenario. And this is given how I think the other teams will perform, who I think they'll beat. And really, I think the likelihood of a 10-7 team missing is very low, right? So they will probably make it if they hit that record. But what I think will happen is that smaller chance of having a lot of teams finishing with good records. And the AFC is a very strong conference compared to the NFC. You got to keep that in mind too. You got better quarterbacks. You got better play overall, I'd say, other than maybe the top couple teams in the NFC. I think there's going to be a lot of winning records in this conference. You got 10 here because you've also got the Browns and the Raiders 9-8. So this leaves Jacksonville in the 3-way tie. It goes to the Bills to start at number 6, and number 7, I believe, comes down to the strength of schedule. Now, I know that's kind of disappointing to say. And like I said before, I think that the Jaguars, if they went 10-7, and I think they will, would probably make the playoffs. And any one of these teams, someone might lose their quarterback. Someone might get hit with the injury bug. Things can change, right? But I do think that if things generally go the same for everyone, no one gets screwed. We can't really predict this stuff. I can't say, oh, well, Aaron Rodgers gets hurt again, or Lamar Jackson gets hurt again. We don't know. And we hope none of them do, right? For the sake of the people themselves, right? But at the end of the day, you know, I think the Jaguars have a lot of teams to compete with. And the important factor in this, like I was talking about earlier, look at the strength of schedule. Look at Indianapolis. 0.457. Second easiest strength of schedule that I had on here. Combined record of 132 and 157 for their opponents. And I don't think that's far off. I think that's somewhere around where it's going to finish at the end of the year. Indianapolis has their quarterback coming back. They have nice additions in the offseason. They may not have went out and spent like the Jaguars and Texans did, but I think they did a really good job in the draft. And I think they're going to be a better team that has a lot of advantages this year that they can take advantage of and maybe win this division. I hope not, of course. But I think the Indianapolis Colts could end up being a sneaky team to win the division this year. So we'll see what happens. It's really a toss-up, right? And if you give this last game to Jacksonville, we'll show that real quick, you can move all the way up to third in the seeding. So it really comes down to that last matchup, and I think it can go both ways because I think Richardson's going to be a good quarterback. I think Lawrence is really good already, but he's still got things to prove, and both teams are pretty complete rosters with a lot to look forward to this year. So we'll have to see what happens, but it could really go either way. Given that I'm saying a lot of things over and over, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. But to kind of finalize this, I think the Jaguars in 2024 have a difficult schedule. I think they have a harder schedule than they did the year before. And it's funny we say that, right? Because they're second place team from last year who should have an easier schedule. I just don't think it plays out that way. So I think the way things go, Jacksonville is a better team playing a harder schedule. The amount they improved is going to be more than what that strength of schedule is worth. I think they win an extra game. I think they learned some lessons from last year. But at the end of the day, if there are a lot of teams competing for one of those last spots, with Jacksonville's difficult matchup at the end of the season, with some other ones they could lose too. We talked about the Jets and the Titans again. They could lose those games as well. I think that Jacksonville comes really close. I think it's a toss-up. But predicting all 32 teams, I think they just missed the playoffs with a better record and are unfortunately the victims of a very competitive AFC conference. So we'll see what happens, right? And this can change if they go out and sign players, if they go make a trade. And I think like a huge thing to talk about, getting another pass rusher. They have nothing behind Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker. You go get an upgrade like that, you get a good player, you go sign a Calais Campbell or trade for someone who's out there. Trey Hendrickson. Throw out a name. Like, there are players out there you can try to go acquire to fix that problem. You have tons of cap space that you freed up this year. I have no problem with them making a move, and I think they need to if they want to solidify themselves as a very confident AFC playoff contender. And man, I'll tell you what, like, even with saying that they would go 10-7 here, things could go a lot worse if you got an injury. We are one offensive lineman away on the interior from having a bad offensive lineman. What happens if Mitch Morse goes down? We're screwed. Like, we have Luke Fortner going back out there. There are problems on this team. If we have injuries, things could go very poorly. And that goes for most teams. But I don't like the depth of this team in every spot. I think there's some very weak places, especially pass rusher. So I'd like to see him make some moves. We'll probably talk about it. We've got plenty of time until the season starts, but I think they need to be searching to do something to make sure that they're going to be safe. They're not going to have the injury bug kill them, and to maybe elevate themselves just that little bit that they need to make the playoffs. So we'll see what happens, right? We're hoping to make the playoffs. I think they got a really good team. I think they also missed out on some opportunities, though. I don't think this was a perfect offseason where everything went right. If it was, I'd go predict them for the Super Bowl again, but that didn't go very well last year. So I'm trying to be a little more realistic about it. We'll see what happens. So I appreciate you guys watching. I'm going to actually record another video right after this. It'll come out this weekend. We'll be talking about Javon Foster, 4th round pick. That'll probably wrap up our film breakdowns. Then I plan to get into some summer scouting. After that, we'll start with wide receivers. We'll go through all the position groups. Not sure if we'll do quarterbacks, of course, but we'll go through most of them for sure. But that's what I've got for y'all. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Let me know what you think about the Jaguars schedule and how you think they're going to finish this year, and any disagreements you have as well. Everyone's probably going to have a disagreement, especially given the division here, but just my thoughts on it. So have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.